Welcome to the Dog's Way Podcast, episode 86. In today's episode, our third installment of our emergency broadcasts, I've got some exercise ideas for you guys to help your dog physically and mentally burn up some energy while you're hanging around at home with your dog. I'll be right back.
Welcome to the Dog's Way Podcast, where we solve dog problems by training people. Because, let's face it, your dog couldn't possibly download this podcast on their own. And now your host, here he is, Sean McDaniel.
Thank you, John Melly, for that introduction, and welcome to the Dog's Way Podcast, episode 86. And in this episode, as you just heard, we've got some exercise ideas for you and your dog, a few games and activities to help burn up some mental and physical energy. Before we do that, I wanted to clarify a couple of things from the last podcast, from the building and working on basic socializing foundational skills. I got a bunch of questions in, but I wanted to answer Emily's email that she sent in because it was representative of like a dozen questions that were kind of revolving around the same topic. Emily writes in, "Hi, Sean. Thanks for these podcasts. What a great idea. We've just finished the puppy socializing skills episode that just came out, and I had a question. Our dog is almost 2 years old, and I recall you saying in previous podcasts that you don't use food after 7 or 8 months. Should we use food in the way that you described in the podcast if our dog is older than 7 months? Thanks so much for the extra podcasts and for keeping us company, Emily." And Emily doesn't say where she's from, or either that or I didn't copy it into my notes. But Emily and all the rest of you guys that asked that same question, you're right. And I think I sort of addressed it. I'm not sure. This is kind of fast and furious editing for these podcasts. But just to give you sort of the context for that philosophical underpinning, and for those of you who are brand new to the podcast too, and you haven't heard my rationale or past podcasts or underlying training philosophy, generally what I say, if you listen closely to what I say, I use kind of those very specific words like politicians and lawyers use, where I say I don't use food as a primary training tool for dogs over 7 or 8 months of age. And by primary training tool, I mean that I don't want the food when a dog gets older and gets more mature psychologically to be the foundation of the relationship. In other words, a dog that just kind of goes, well, I just hang out with you because you have a bait bag on your hip. I want to develop a little bit more of an organic social relationship with a dog. Doesn't mean with adult dogs that I don't ever use food. If we're working on kind of defining something really particularly, doing some behavioral modification, teaching a game or a trick, food, luring, and specific rewarding, marking and rewarding stuff can be a really useful tool. The only reason that I don't just keep doing that sort of purely positive operant type conditioning in the foundational relationship with a dog as they get older is because I just don't want that food to get in the way of the organic relationship. I use food with puppies all the time because their psychology is just different. They don't have the same kind of relationship with food or with the rest of the quote unquote pack as they do when they're older. And kind of the human example I give when I'm talking about that training philosophy notion, Emily, you've probably heard me say it before, but for those of you who are new, I guess the way I think about it is that underlying methodologies and techniques for training based on age isn't just a canine training idea. We do that with little humans too, meaning we have different training techniques and different training methods for little kids than we do for bigger kids, teenagers, and then certainly with adults. The human thought experiment I always give people with that is that if you were in the grocery store and you saw somebody with their little toddler-aged kid and they were picking up something they weren't supposed to have on the shelf and they said, "Hey, little Johnny, put that down," and they used the parent counting technique that all parents seem to learn, 1, 2, 3. You might like that parenting technique or not like that parenting technique, but without being a developmental psychologist or a parenting expert, you probably wouldn't roll your eyes and think that parent was crazy. However, if you saw that same parent at the grocery store with their 17-year-old kid, with a teenager that's driving and almost ready to move out of the house and go off to college, using the same parenting technique, they point at their 17-year-old teenager and say, "Jonathan, you put that down. 1, 2, 3. You probably, without knowing anything about developmental psychology or parenting skills or techniques, you probably rightly would roll your eyes and go like, seriously? We're still doing the 1, 2, 3 technique? So that's kind of the best human analogy I can kind of give you for my rationale for different training techniques and different strategies with differently aged dogs. So to your question, Emily, yeah, I would say with that behavior modification that we're kind of working on, when you're working on either that be brave training from the last episode or the other side of that flip side of that same issue, that overly exuberant reaction to that change in the environment you're creating, we're doing really kind of a behavior modification strategy. And so if food is motivating for your dog and it helps us mark and reinforce in a little more amped up kind of artificial way with that food that motivates them, then yeah, by all means do that. When you guys get into that practical permutation of those exercises that I mentioned at the end of the last episode, where maybe you're teaching your dog not to chase your kids down the hallway or across the yard, or you're teaching a dog not to react to a cat that's walking by or something like that, that little amped up sort of positive reinforcement, that artificial reward of the food can really help sort of make that point, and it can tune up that minimum threshold of effective communication on the positive side of the ledger as well. So I don't ever rule out food completely, but to give you that context, Emily, that's why I say that about not having food as a primary training tool. I want to try to go through, like, for example, in the big online video course we have, the Dog's Way training course, that's all non-food based. That's really designed for people that, tried a lot of food stuff, tried purely positive training, and just found that their dog only does stuff when they have food. And then goes, you don't get it. My relationship's with the food, not with you. I don't do stuff unless you have treats in your pocket. As soon as I figure out you don't have treats in your pocket, I'm out of here. See ya. And so that video training course gets to kind of that organic foundation and that social relationship with a dog that's over 7 months old, and it gets that functional reliability in real life happening a little bit more. So hopefully that answers your question, Emily. Good one, though, because like a dozen and a half other people had a very similar question. So thanks for asking it. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode, and that's exercise ideas for your dog. So I'll give you sort of the abridged version of this, of what I'm going to cover with you guys, but I'm not just going to kind of list off ideas, right? I want to give you some rules with some of these games and tasks that will help all of your other things, will help your relationship, will help your obedience, and help your bonding with your dog as well. And it'll help clarify some of the rules of these games and tasks so that you can play them more with your dog if your dog's interested in this kind of stuff. So some of these games and tasks too, by the way, aren't for every dog. This is sort of dependent on your dog's genetically predisposed drives and instincts that they have. Some of it has to do with breed profile. Some of it has to do with individual personality. And you kind of have a sense of that if you've been hanging around with your dog for a while. You have a sense of their kind of prey drive or their ball drive with fetching or something like that. So I'll give you the short list of what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll go through and start talking about sort of the training of that and the kind of the rule teaching of that and what goals you should have when you're taking part in these activities with your dog. So here's the short list. We're going to go over fetch. We're going to go over tug. Yes, tug. Tug's okay to play with your dog as long as you have some rules for that. If you haven't used a flirt pole with your dog, it's that thing that people use with cats a lot, right? It looks like a little fishing pole and has some feathers at the end of it. Well, there's kind of big versions of that, or you can kind of DIY that. I'll walk you through a little DIY version of that flirt pole with your dog. Usually only good if dogs have a really high prey drive and like chasing stuff. If you have a chaser on your hands, that's probably going to be a good exercise for you guys. And then we're going to go through a couple of my favorite feeding toys, feeding puzzles for your dog to kind of just entertain them a little bit while they're going after some of their food. Maybe take a third of their meal and put it in a puzzle or a toy so that they have to kind of work and mentally sort of stimulate themselves to get at that food instead of just wolfing it down from a bowl. And then the fifth thing I'm going to mention today is just a reference to a previous podcast where I described all kinds of nose work games for your dog. That's kind of a hide and seek type game that takes you through progressively more challenging finds with your dog where they default to scent finding as opposed to visual finding and start burning up a lot of energy using that scent discrimination part of their brain. And it's a good thing to do inside too. So I'll refer you to that podcast. Then the other thing you can really do is kind of redouble your efforts in any obedience homework that you know. Go through a few workouts with your dog. Doesn't have to be a 45 or 60-minute workout. Do like 4 or 5 10-minute workouts with your dog throughout the day and see if you could get into a little bit of a schedule with your dog. That's one of the big things for your own psychology right now too, by the way, is developing a schedule and a set of rituals for yourself is going to help both you and your dog. It helps all social creatures to have some structure in their schedule. If you've been laid off, or if you've had your job kind of downsized, or you just don't have a bunch of work to do that you normally would, or you're working from home, but your normal work schedule and rituals have been kind of upended, and you're finding yourself not really fitting into this sort of way more open-ended schedule that you have, develop some structure for yourself and your dog in your daily schedule, and you'll find that that kind of increases your motivation a little bit. It gives you some consistency of expectation as the days go by here. So in that consistency of schedule, it's my last little recommendation in this episode is just kind of get some structure going in some frequent obedience skills practice. Just redouble your effort on something. In the next couple of episodes, I'll have some specific obedience challenges for you guys, and you can kind of work that into the mix and see how that works over the next few days for you guys. But let's jump into our games and kind of structured play exercises here, and I'll give you some frames to think about all of these games. So there's a few general rules we want to think about when we're playing a game with our dog, like fetch, but particularly like tug and those flirt pole games. That's kind of like tug with more chasing. We want to have some rules to those games. One of the main rules about those games is that you start and end the games. It's not kind of within your dog's job description or purview to demand a game from you. That's where some of that schedule development happens too, where you let your dog kind of know that there's sort of a schedule for this stuff. Yeah, first thing in the morning, we're going to go out, buddy, and we're going to play for 15 or 20 minutes. Then we're going to have breakfast. Then we're going to do the rest of our morning ritual. Then we'll go for a walk a little bit later in the day. And before each meal, if you do a little obedience training and a little playtime, then you're going to get a lot of sort of structural expectations from your dog settled, and your dog won't be kind of getting bored and demanding attention from you. So that's rule number one about all our games, is that you start and end the games. When we're playing games like tug or chase games with that flirt pole, where your dog's really kind of competing for something. In other words, like fetch, they sort of get the ball every time, right? You throw the ball, they get it, they bring it back. There isn't really a kind of a win or lose to that game. In a tug game or a flirt pole game where they're chasing after something to catch it, you want to make sure your dog has sort of some motivation to do that. So we want to have kind of a win ratio for them of about 30 or 40%. So they feel like it's a kind of a variable ratio reward schedule, right? Where they're every third or fourth time they're really catching it. And then you're teasing them with that tug and teasing them with that flirt pole again. And maybe they don't catch it that one time. If you're introducing something for your dog, though, we want to have a higher rate of success for that when we're introducing a game. If your dog hasn't played tug or hasn't played a chase with a flirt pole before, we want to have 3 or 4 or 5 consistent successes, and then start to make that more random in their success of catching the object or winning that tug game. So success ratio when you're playing those competitive games of about 30-40% winning for your dog. You're winning majority of the time. Your dog's winning about 30 or 40% of the time. We're going to work in with fetch, tug, and flirt pole games. We're going to work in sort of that functional drop it as well. And so if you guys don't have a drop it command nailed down with your dog, I'll walk you through a step-by-step process of how to teach your dog drop it. And to go back to your question, Emily, we are going to use food for that right out of the gate. So these games like fetch and tug and flirt pole stuff are a great opportunity to teach a dog to kind of start listening in drive as well, to get kind of amped up. And then also, just like our exercises yesterday, to teach them to come down from being in drive as well, kind of come out of that drive mode and settle a little bit more. And then we can amp things back up again. So playing games with these structured rules helps them in that nervous system management goal that we were kind of working on in yesterday's podcast as well. So now that we've got those general rules that you start and end the game, that you have a win ratio for your dog after they've learned to play a game of about 30 or 40%, and then we have that kind of sidebar goal through all of these exercises of teaching your dog a drop it. That means spit the toy out of your mouth or spit the ball out of your mouth. And we've got it in the back of our mind that we're teaching a dog to settle, come out of drive, and then go back into drive. Let's start talking about some specific tasks. So fetch. Now, some of you guys already fetch with your dog, and you know how that is. You can play a fetch fetch in the hallway, or you can play it in the backyard if you have one of those. If your dog isn't into fetching, well, this isn't really going to be something that is going to work for you guys, because there is such a thing as a forced retrieve that you can teach a dog, but all working, hunting, retrieving dogs go through kind of a part of their training that's kind of called a forced retrieve or a forced fetch, where you use compulsion to sort of get them to hold the object. I've experimented with those things in the past, but the reason that I don't use it for game playing is that I guess the way I look at it is it's just a game. So to really kind of drill a dog and use compulsion to get a dog into playing a game, well, it seems like a lot of work to go through to teach a dog a game. If they're like, well, I'm not really into that game, then we'll play something else. But for those of you who have a dog that likes to fetch, the big goal for you guys in this task, as you're reintroducing some fetch rules to your dog, is to just set that structure up. So what we're going to do initially, sometimes people play fetch and their dog won't drop the ball, or they go get the ball, but then they come back and they kind of run around and they want you to play a little chase with them. But we're going to structure things up a little bit more, and then we'll start to tune things up and amp things up a little bit more as they start to get the rules. So what you're going to need to structure fetch for your dog is you're going to need either a dropped leash if you're inside, or a long line if you're outside. So a 15 or 20 foot piece of rope will do. You can get a $2 clip sent to you from Amazon and sort of make a little training line for yourself. So you can kind of step on that line and play fetch within that 20 or 25 foot line length for just a little bit, so you can kind of bring your dog into you and guide your dog into you with that line, and they don't get that sense that they can just go anywhere once they get the ball. The other thing we're going to use is we're going to use a bag of food that's motivating for them, have that in your pocket, and we're literally just going to trade for food. So you get them a little amped up, teasing them a little bit with that ball or that fetch toy, and then you just toss it out about 10 or 12 feet. As soon as they grab that ball, you're clapping your hands and crouching down, just like we were doing in that enticing puppy posture in the last podcast. And when they come all the way over to you, you have a treat in your hand, and you literally stick a treat right on their nostril. And just as you're doing that, you say, drop it. To take the treat out of your hand, they have to open their mouth and drop the ball or the toy. As soon as they do that, make a bowl under their mouth, give them the treat as you grab the ball, and then rinse and repeat. Start that all over again. Tease them a little bit with a couple of fake throws, get them kind of amped up, toss that ball 10 or 12 feet. As soon as they pick it up with their mouth, clap your hands, crouch down, call them back over. You've got your hands on the line. If you're using a nylon rope, by the way, or a nylon line, I definitely order a pair of those $4 rubberized gardening gloves, because it really helps when you're using a nylon line outside. Sometimes I think I still have some rope burn scars on my hand to attest to the fact that grabbing a nylon line while a large dog is running away from you is not the best idea in the whole world. So once you've got that idea of a more structured fetch, and you've got that dog coming right over to you, and you've got that long line, and you've got your treats that you're trading for the ball drop, and that drop it command doesn't mean anything, by the way, really yet. If you haven't said that to your dog, and you can say whatever command you want, it doesn't matter. I say drop it because it kind of makes sense to me. A lot of working dog people say out, means kind of take your teeth off of that thing. But you can say pineapple if you want to. It doesn't matter what you're saying. It just means spit the ball out, spit the toy out. Once you have that happening over and over again, what you can do is you can withhold that treat for just a second, say drop it, and see what your dog does. See what their understanding is of that command after you've done that a dozen times in a row. My guess, after a dozen or 15 times, when you say drop it and take that step towards your dog, they're going to go pluh and spit that ball or toy out. In which case, then you can reward that. Good. And then give them that treat. But you want to have that little gap, that delay between handing that treat over right away. Initially, for those first dozen repetitions, we're literally going to stick a treat to their nose, so they just have to open their mouth to grab the treat, and the ball's going to fall out of their mouth, or the toy's going to fall out of their mouth. You're almost classically conditioning that. Literally, they're just going to grab the treat. The fact that the ball or the toy comes out of their mouth is just kind of incidental to the fact that they just had to open their mouth to get the treat. So once you've got that understanding happening and you've got those rules happening a little bit more, you can start to throw a few things into the mix with your fetch. You can start to do some obedience in drive. Your dog comes back, they're really motivated. You say drop it. You've got the ball in your hand now. You're teasing them a little bit, and you say sit. Provided they know sit. This isn't going to be a good way to introduce a sit, because they're too drivey right now to sort of learn a new thing. This is just using something they already know and tuning that up a bit, getting them to do it a little bit faster and in a little more excited way. So if they sit, you say, good. And then say your release command. I say break. So I would say break. And then I would throw the ball. And right when I throw it, I would say fetch it. So they just start to hear that every time I throw the ball or the toy for them. Fetch it. That's going to come in later when we want to fine tune some of that fetching exercise. When I can fetch it means go after the ball. So if I throw the ball and say fetch it and then say leave it later, they can turn around, turn away from that thing and start coming back away from the ball to me. And then I can point again and say fetch it and they can go get it again. So we're not going to do that in this sort of introductory piece of this structured fetch, but that's why I want you to just start saying something that means go get the ball. Take it, fetch it up, whatever your phrase or word is that means go get the ball. Just say it as you throw the ball now, and it'll just start to sink in kind of classically just by association there. So that's kind of our structuring of fetch a little bit and kind of throwing in that little side benefit of teaching your dog drop it as well if they don't know that skill of spitting something out of their mouth. By the way, just as a little aside, we don't want to say drop it and then try to yank the ball or the toy out of their mouth. Just stick that treat right on their nose. Literally just rub the treat on their nose and see if they'll do that. If they won't trade the ball or the toy for the treat, then upgrade that treat a little bit. If you need a higher value treat, use those pre-cooked hot dogs from the grocery store. Order some of those from your local delivery place these days, and then cut those into tiny little 1/8-inch pieces, and that'll probably motivate them to cooperate with the drop it. So that's our structured fetch. Let's move on to tug. Tug is very similar. The game is a little more competitive with us, though. You probably know right now whether you have a dog that likes tug or not, because dogs either kind of like it or they don't like it. Kind of like with fetch. So if you have that tug-oriented dog, it's even more important because of that competition over the resource to teach your dog a really structured set of rules with tug. So you can play tug with almost anything, but it's really a good idea to have a structured tug toy that you guys only play that game with that toy. I'll include some links in the show notes of a tug toy that I like that's really durable. It's going to last you for a really long time. I'll include a couple Amazon links in there in the show notes for you guys. But you can play that with a hunk of rope. You can play that with all kinds of stuff. There's a couple of things I wouldn't play tug with, though. I wouldn't play it with a sock that you sacrifice or a slipper that you sacrifice. I wouldn't use any of those items that can be very easily confused with everyday household items that your dog then goes to pick up your next pair of shoes to go, hey, let's start playing tug with this instead. It's almost exactly like the tug toy that you introduced to me last month. So really segregate out that idea that there's our tug toy and then there's kind of everything else. So that's part of the structure. There's a particular tug toy. There's a particular time. You start the game and you end the game. So we're going to get our dog interested. We're going to go out to our kind of play spot too, or you could play that in your living room, but don't play it in the bedroom, for example. Just have kind of a very consolidated, consistent place, toy, and sort of time and rules that you play that game of tug with. So you're going to do kind of a similar thing. You're going to get that tug toy in their face. You're going to do your little teasing of them a little bit with the tug toy, moving it past their mouth quickly. When you start to see that eye tracking happen and that mouth start to reflexively open, you know you've got them kind of amping up a little bit. And then you kind of give them a little gentle bop in the nose so they kind of come back at you a little bit and they grab that tug toy and you apply a little bit of pressure and let them kind of pull back on that a bit. If they're new to tug, then just let them win that. Boom. Let that go and let them kind of have that victory. And then you can do exactly what you did with the fetch toy. Walk over with some food, wave that food in front of them, let them know you have it. Say drop it, and then put that little piece of hot dog right on their nose. As they take that treat from you, just slide that tug toy out of the way with your foot, lean down, use your leg to kind of block that and pick that up so you're not competing for that when it's on the ground. We don't want that sort of ritual to get developed where your dog kind of goes, well, it's kind of a game, right? Whoever can get to it first can grab that tug toy. Kind of like with the fetching ball. You don't want to have that happen either for dogs that are really ball crazy or really toy crazy. So you structure that up again. You get them a little amped up. You tease them with that tug toy a bit. Once they grab onto it, provide a little bit of a gentle pull back. Consistent pressure is going to make them consistently pull back against you. Lower that down a little bit. Get them going a bit. And before they get too amped up, let them win that game. So 2 or 3 consistent wins if you're introducing this to your dog. If your dog already knows how to play tug, you know they're into it, then we'll go right to that second step. The second step is teaching the drop it, teaching the cessation of that game. So what you're going to do is you're going to play that tug game. You're going to offer that resistance. And then what you're going to do is you're going to just hang on with one hand and you're just going to stop pulling on that much. In other words, you're not going to play the game very well. You're going to reach in your pocket, grab a treat. You're going to go to stick it on their nose. And you're going to say, drop it. Just like you did with the fetch ball. When they go to open that mouth up, you give them that treat, you put that tug toy behind your back, and you just have them settle for a second. When you're playing this, either initially or with your dog and you're structuring things up, you want to have their leash and collar on as well so that you can sort of manage them a bit. So if they start to kind of maul you and go like, hey, give me the toy, it's behind your back, I know where it is, and they start jumping up on you and going for that toy, you can grab that leash, give them a little pop back and kind of correct them back to go, hey, settle down. You can't mug me for this thing. And then you can put that toy up high and just put it away for a couple of minutes and then ignore them. So they get kind of that immediate correction back, and then the game just ends if they try to kind of mug you for that tug toy. And then once they settle a little bit more, you can get that tug toy out again, get them a little amped up, tease them, get them into drive, get that tug game happening, and then take one hand off of that tug toy. Let that other one kind of be a little softer. In other words, don't apply as much consistent pressure. Let them kind of pull that and maybe even follow them a bit as you reach into your pocket. Grab that treat, say drop it, stick the treat to their nose, and as they open their mouth, give them that treat, put that toy behind your back, and have them just wait for a second and settle down just a little bit, 10, 20, 30 seconds, and then you can start the game again. The reason you're waiting in between bouts of playing tug is that that's kind of introducing the idea of, hey, I start the game. You can't just go around my back, or you can't jump on me and kind of mug me a bit and get that game going again. You have to wait for me to start the game. So teaching the drop it means that round of the game's over. You got to let that go, and I'm going to have the tug. And then you can start to throw in that 30 or 40% success thing. Really get them going and then let them win that. Walk over, get them to drop the tug toy, and just sort of repeat that structure with your dog so that they really understand that you start and end the game. You can stop any bout of that with the drop it command. Take that tug toy from them as they drop that. And then you can restart that game again. And then when you put that away, that's the end of the game, and they have to sort of abide by that. So that's our structured tug game. The Flirt Pole game, if you've never seen one of these things before, I'll put another link in the show notes as well. I'll see if we can get a picture into the show notes as well. Kind of looks like a short stick with a line on it and has a little tug toy at the end of it. So it's kind of like playing tug, except it's not as much tug as it is sort of chase. So you're going to play a little short tug game at the end once your dog catches it, but it's much more sort of chasing. It's like 90% chasing, 10% tug. So for dogs that are a little more chase-oriented, have a really high prey drive, these kinds of flirt poles are really good for that kind of thing. So you're going to actually start the game just like you do with tug. You're going to kind of tease them with that a little bit, scoop that, whip that past their face, whip it past their feet. As soon as you see those eyes tracking and that mouth kind of reflexively opening like they're going to sort of go for it, then you know you've kind of got them amped up. Before you actually go and purchase one of these, though, or you can DIY these too. If you use like a nice light piece of wood, you cut a 3-foot piece or a 2-foot piece of like 1x2 pine, drill a hole in the end of it and put an old bootlace, tie a bootlace through that hole, and then tie your tug toy to it. You've kind of got yourself a flirt pole. You can buy a lighter, more finessed version of this for like $30 or $40 on Amazon as well. I'll include a link in the show notes to the one that I know. There's ones you can get for $13 or $14 or $15 as well. I just can't vouch for them. I haven't used them before. The one that I'll put in the show notes is one that I've used before, and it's lasted through. I did have one dog that broke it, but if you have a werewolf, might not last. But with a lot of my dogs, they've lasted through those kinds of things. So it's pretty durable and easy to use, and it's kind of a quality piece of equipment. And I think it's only about $30 or $40. But before you go through any effort in DIYing one or purchasing one, you can just see if your dog likes this too. What you can do, you can just take a little piece of rope or that bootlace that you're going to DIY something with and just tie it around a washcloth and start teasing them with it and see if they want to chase it around the side of the sofa or chase it around the side of the chair or chase it around the corner of the hallway. If they get into that little game and they like chasing that, then, you might have a good candidate for that flirt pole. The reason the pole is good is you've got about a 2 or 3 foot pole with some of these things, and then you've got about a 3 or 4 foot line, and then you've got your toy at the end of it, is you can kind of create a lot of speed with that and a lot of angles. And so you can kind of just spin around and have them chasing that thing for a good 30, 40, 50 seconds. And dogs that don't like to fetch necessarily might actually like chasing this sort of thing. So that's where that flirt pole comes in handy. Same thing in the introduction of this too, by the way, is if you're introducing that idea, we want your dog to kind of succeed in catching that pretty quickly. Get them kind of amped up, do one little pass by them, and then let them sort of catch that first off. You've got your treats with you, you've got your leash on your dog, and you walk up and you say, drop it. Do the exact same drop it exercise we did with the fetch ball or the fetch toy, with the tug toy, and you get them to drop it, and then you start the game again. That teaches them all those same goals we have for any of these drivey type games. You start the game, you end the game, but you want to have those consistent introduction bouts of this flirt pole. Just like with a tug toy, you want to have success right away for your dog. Oh, I caught it right away. Oh, I caught it in the second bout. I caught it in the third bout. I caught it in the fourth bout. And then you can have a little more chasing going on, a little more challenging chase. You can move around and create a little larger chase area if you've got the room to do that, and then kind of hide it from your dog for a second. So you know how they say never tease dogs? Well, it's not true. If you're playing drivey games, you're teasing dogs all the time. Just tease them with purpose and then have them channel that drive they're developing from that teasing into the game. So that fetch, tug, and flirt pole stuff are for dogs that are pretty drivey. So if you don't have a dog that's really drivey, if you don't have one of those dogs that has a high prey drive or ball drive or toy drive, what do you do with those dogs? Well, I've got some ideas for you there too. What you can do is take just a piece of their meal and put it in kind of a food puzzle toy that they have to work a little bit to get the food out of it. I've got 2 links in the show notes for you guys of 2 of the toys I use a lot. One of them is from Starmark and the other one is from PetSafe, I believe. And they're both good toys in that you can adjust the difficulty level of that toy. So just like with introducing those drivey games like tug, fetch, and flirt pole stuff, we want to have early success right away so the dog goes, whoa, this is amazing. I'm succeeding at this all the time. We want to have that consistent reward schedule early on. And so you can open up the slots that the food comes out of so they don't have to do much to get the food that first game. And then you can start to tighten that down a little bit, make it a little harder to get that food out. It doesn't come out as easily, so they have to manipulate that a little bit more to get the food out of that. So those are pretty self-explanatory, except I want to give you just a couple of rules with these kinds of toys. These aren't the kinds of toys where you just go, hey, buddy, here's your new food dispensing toy or your food puzzle toy. Have fun in the backyard with it. It's not that kind of thing, because these aren't really made as durable. They're not meant to be chew toys. They're meant to be puzzle toys. So if you have a big dog with big, strong jaws, they'll just rip these things apart. I had one of my kids make that mistake with a Rottweiler that I had. I had this one of these plastic ones you'll see here. It's called a Bob-a-Lot from Starmark. One of my kids gave that with some food in it to one of my Rottweilers, and it ended up in about 4 pieces. She just said, like, well, I know how to get to the food. Why don't I just rip this thing apart? And there you go. The food's all over the place. So this is more an entertainment kind of puzzle thing to do with your dog. It's not kind of a babysitter for your dog. If you want sort of a babysitter for your dog and a high-value chew toy, go with one of those black rubber Kongs or something like that, something that's a real high-density rubber product that is meant to be really durable, and then put something inside it where they can kind of lick and get treats out of it. What I do with those big rubber Kongs is I'll put a little bit of coconut oil in that and stuff some of their food in that. So it's a little bit hard to get out. They have to kind of work at it a little bit. That's more a kind of a toy that you can leave with them in a crate. These 2 things are more entertainment and puzzle devices, and not as much that kind of babysitter type device that you're going to put in with your dog in a crate or a kennel run. So they're pretty self-explanatory. I'll leave the links in the show notes for you guys to kind of entertain your dog. Be sure to take that food out of their feeding amount, though, too. You don't want to overfeed them. So take about a third of their food and put it in these puzzle things, and that'll give them a little more entertainment throughout the day. And then the last thing I want to leave you guys with for stuff to do is more listening of podcasts. So if you find you have some more time on your hands, I'd go back and check out episode 16, and there's a whole other podcast on nose game. So that teaches you to show your dog how to find a toy in progressively harder and harder finds. So I'll let you listen to that episode. I won't give you kind of the Cliff's notes on that because that episode's pretty comprehensive and it'll take you through that. There's also a blog article that's in the show notes for that show that gives you a little bit of a cheat sheet on the nose games as well. So in keeping with the mini tradition that I guess I started yesterday, I'll leave you with a quote about resilience. This one comes from, well, a long time ago, from a lyrical poet named Horace, who lived in first century Rome. He wrote, "Adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which, in prosperous times, would have lain dormant." I know there's a lot of us out there going through really severe hardship. I live just a few minutes from that care home in Kirkland, Washington, that suffered so many deaths in just a couple of weeks. We've had a member of our school community that succumbed to this virus last week. Others are being hit really hard financially. And I know there's a lot of you that have friends, family, and community members that are seriously affected by this virus. Others of us are frustrated with the massive changes in our schedules and the way we live our lives. I don't want to minimize the challenges that any of us are facing, but I do want to leave you with that sentiment, that my hope for you guys is that this adversity reveals talents that you otherwise might not have known that you've had, and that you draw on those talents and that resilience and that will that these circumstances has given us the opportunity to uncover and develop. So there you go. Hopefully that leaves you guys with some energy-burning stuff for your dogs to help your dog's psychology and maybe a few thoughts on human motivational psychology as well. So until I talk to you in podcast 87, go have some fun with your dog. I'll talk to you next time.